L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup.
It's not true that French laws are dictated by Brussels.
C'est un peu voter pour des choses pour éviter le pire.
Hello and welcome to France in Focus. I'm Charlie James, and today we're talking elections, the upcoming European elections to be precise. And we're in a fitting location to do so, the Place de l'Europe here in Paris, where the streets are named after major cities on the continent. Like all EU nations, France participates in the European elections, sending 79 deputies to the parliament. Now, you may be wondering, how do the European elections work and why are they important? That's where we begin.
This year, voters in France will choose their European representatives from national lists of French candidates. And for the first time, holding dual mandates has been banned under French law. Representatives must therefore choose between serving as a member of the French or European Parliament. Voters will choose from a record 34 different electoral lists in May's election. There are 6 separate lists for left-wing parties. They include the French Communist Party, the Green Party, and the Socialist Party. On the right and in the center, there are 3 candidates: François-Xavier Bellamy for the Republican Party, Jean-Christophe Lagarde for the centrist UDI Party, and Nathalie Loiseau for the ruling Republic on the Move Party, which is hoping to form and lead a new pro-EU group in the European Parliament.
If the National Rally Party, formerly the National Front, obtains more votes than the ruling party, it will immediately be considered a defeat for the president and his government.
Further to the right are Jordan Bardella with Rassemblement National and François Asselineau, representing the Popular Republican Union. The now 6-month-old Yellow Vest movement, too, is hoping to transform European politics, with 4 lists in the running. Nicolas Dupont-Aignan and Florian Philippot both have Yellow Vest leaders on their lists. And 2 other figures belonging to the protest movement, Christophe Chalençon and Francis Lalanne, are candidates as well. But despite the abundance of choices, many French citizens do not plan to vote.
It's what we call a secondary election because it doesn't lead to immediately perceptible results. It won't designate a representative with the executive power to make decisions that French people think will have an immediate impact on their daily lives.
The only constraint for the French electoral lists, all 79 of them must have an equal number of male and female candidates.
France has historically been one of the driving forces behind European cooperation. This started at the end of World War II and continues today with the presidency of Emmanuel Macron. But not all the French have warm and fuzzy feelings about the European Union. In fact, nearly half have a negative opinion of the EU, mostly because of the economic crisis affecting the continent. Let's take a look back at France's role in the creation of the EU.
At the end of World War II, Europe laid in ruins, with millions dead. To prevent such a war from ever happening again, France and Germany launched a joint project, spearheaded by 2 Frenchmen, Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman.
L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup.
Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements, which will create a de facto solidarity.
This vision progressed the following year with the creation of the ECSC, a common market for coal and steel uniting France and West Germany, as well as Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, and Italy. But Paris didn't support full integration. It voted against a joint European military, and President Charles de Gaulle had an empty chair policy, boycotting European institutions. But in 1957, France ratified the European Economic Community, which established a common market in the 6 founding member states for goods, services, labor, and capital, and created a common agricultural policy. During this time, de Gaulle strengthened ties with the former Chancellor of West Germany, Konrad Adenauer. In 1963, the 2 countries signed a friendship treaty, marking a new start for Franco-German relations and a step forward for the European project. These relations deepened in the 70s and 80s, with French President François Mitterrand signing the Single European Act in 1986, in a move supporting more economic integration. As the European project evolved, France continued to play a key role. In 1992, it signed the Treaty of Maastricht. which founded the European Union and the euro. Several years later, the seat of the European Parliament was built in Strasbourg. But France's support for the EU hasn't been ironclad. In a 2005 referendum, the country rejected a proposed constitution for the EU, which had been drafted by former French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. Nearly a decade later, most of the proposal would ultimately be ratified in the Treaty of Lisbon. The financial crisis of 2008 hit Europe and the Eurozone hard. It laid bare the economic inequalities within the bloc and led some core member states to seek deeper integration, a move supported by French President Emmanuel Macron, who believes more cooperation is the answer to destabilizations such as Brexit.
Despite France's strong role in the European Union, the French aren't particularly fascinated by the European elections. Last time around, in 2014, only a little over 42% came out to vote, a little shabby compared with the nearly 90% of Belgians who participated. But there are a number of initiatives working to increase interest and turnout.
Inclement weather means the Festival of Europe in Paris is a bit of a damp squib. But free concerts have pulled in a few passers-by.
I
heard the bass and the concert looked good, so yeah.
Juicy is a Belgian duo. Its singers are happy to be performing, but they too have concerns about the upcoming elections. You're voting, but not necessarily for something that you really believe in. It's tough, but on the other hand, voting is really important, and you have to be aware of that. The Europa Vox Festival's been touring all over France. One of their acts is Anglo-Irish comedian Paul Taylor. He lives in Paris, feels European, and is anti-Brexit.
I've never voted in my life, unfortunately, just because I haven't had the opportunity to. But I also have a lot of excuses, and I think that I was scared because I didn't know what I was voting for. I didn't have the information, and so I didn't vote. And then I realised that everyone else doesn't have the information either. But they're still voting.
Others have chosen more traditional methods to encourage people to get themselves to the polling booths. Insurance company Allianz is one of 100 companies who've signed the I'm Voting in Europe manifesto, organising debates and conferences on what's at stake when it comes to European issues.
In a company like Allianz, we make 2/3 of our profits in Europe. So if there was no Europe, there would be no work for any of us.
Car insurance, imports and exports are among the socio-economic concerns raised here, underlining the fact that European politics affect personal and professional lives and that voters can have a say in them.
Like so many places in the world, Europe is having to fight against fake news influencing its elections. The integrity of the entire vote depends on how well each of the member states can fend off bots, hackers, and yes, Russia. France 24's Europe editor, Catherine Nicholson, is our go-to expert for all things related to the European elections. She joins us now. So, Kat, how vulnerable are the EU elections when it comes to the spread of fake news?
Well, the EU is certainly very worried about it. They've been talking about how worried they are ever since they launched these elections a year ago. For example, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, they invited Mark Zuckerberg over to be supposedly grilled, but it was more of a slightly polite interview in the end. Of course, the EU doesn't really have any particular power over Facebook. Just recently, the EU signed a code of conduct with platforms requiring them to take certain actions against fake news. But this code of conduct isn't legally binding, and the platforms can pull out at any time. So in terms of what the EU is doing internally, they've invested, for example, in their own anti-fake news unit called Stratcom. They don't talk a lot about their work, but they are essentially debunking Russian and Russian-influenced propaganda.
Let's talk about some specific stories. Now, earlier this year, there was a conspiracy theory that France was going to sell one of its regions to Germany. I mean, it sounds unbelievable, but a lot of people fell for it.
This is a story that originated with an MEP, a French guy called Bernard Monod. He made a video making this claim that Germany was essentially going to sort of annex Alsace and Lorraine. two areas of France that border Germany. A lot of people believed it. It was very widely propagated, particularly by members of the Gilets jaunes movement who believed it was true. And it really wasn't true at all. It coincided with the signing of a new Franco-German treaty. One of the parts of that was to talk about more cross-border cooperation, especially with local communities by the border. Nothing at all about annexing these regions, and Bernard Monod did eventually actually delete the video, but only after it had been so widely shared.
Yeah, damage already done. Another false story that really caught fire in France involved chicken and chlorine. What's the deal there?
Well, a lot of people will have heard about chlorine-washed chicken, something that is allowed in the United States under American safety standards. However, it's not allowed in the European Union. It's been banned here since 1997, in fact. But Jordan Bardella, who's a leading figure in Rassemblement National, which used to be the National Front, Marine Le Pen's party, he put out this story saying that thanks to the EU's international trade treaties, chlorinated chicken and transgenic salmon and some other things were being imported into the EU. As I said, these things are banned. There's no plans afoot for them to be allowed into the EU. But again, people worry about the food that they eat, and they will share these stories believing them to be true.
And finally, Kat, some people think that French politics are really dictated by the EU. Is there any truth behind that?
Well, of course, France is an EU member state, and some decisions are taken at the European level that member states sign up to and therefore have to go along with. But it's not true that French laws are dictated by Brussels, which is the sort of thing that we do fairly commonly here. If I give one example, privatisation within the French National Railway Company, SNCF. Now, this was influenced by the EU's competition laws. They do want there to be some element of competition within big state-owned companies like SNCF. And their argument is that this allows more competitive prices to be found for the consumer. So they say it's about consumer protection. But of course, it can be seen as, oh, the EU is wanting to sell off our railway company. Unfortunately, I think we are in an era where people are speed reading and not looking at details, misunderstandings on one hand, and perhaps out and out fake news on the other.
Europe editor Kat Nicholson, thanks so much for joining us on France in Focus. Do be sure to stay tuned to France 24.